Is it showing just the presentation and my video, or is it showing like the chat log and all that other fun stuff?
It's showing the chat and the presentation and your webcam.
Okay. And you all listening will have to forgive myself and Mike. We are very new to this platform, so please just be patient with us. Here. There we go. That's what I was looking for. Is it showing a full screen now, Mike?
No.
Of
course, I'm not sure that what I see is the same view that the participants see.
I know how it looks on our end. All right, thank you, Steve Hall. Steve Hall has just alerted me that we're all good and they can handle how it looks on their end. Thank you. All right. Well, folks, it is 3 o'clock. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Cassondra Cruikshank. I'm an environmental biologist for KYTC. I work in the main office in Frankfurt. I have districts, for now, I have districts 1, 5, 6, 10, and 11. So some of you may know me. On the horn here, I got Mike Smith, who's our Roadside Environmental State Administrator. You won't be seeing his face today, so don't be too confused if you see my face and Mike's voice. We are here to talk to you about pollinators in KYTC. We have a pollinator initiative that is going through KYTC right now, and the current and future policies and plans for pollinators with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. So let's get started. So why pollinators? Why is KYTC getting involved with pollinators at all? Well, as a state affiliate, KYTC recognizes that pollinators actually have a lot of importance to Kentucky. They are a foundational part of the food web, and Kentucky, which is mainly considered an agricultural state, is reliant upon pollinators and pollinator habitats for our agricultural base. Around 70% of the world's most commonly cultivated crops have to be pollinated by pollinators in some way, shape, or form. So we are aware that if pollinators are suffering, or if species are going extinct or being put onto the endangered species list, that may in turn hurt the economy and the entire identity of a great amount of Kentucky. So we are sensitive to that fact. Another reason that KYTC is involved in pollinators is that we're kind of the ideal form of government that could take on pollinators because of our available space. Kentucky has over 27,500 miles of roadway, and right-of-way in certain places is actually ideal to put pollinator habitat into because it allows for these large connected swaths of pollinator habitat. One of the problems that can be seen with pollinator habitat and as far as pollinator breeding is genetic diversity, and these small pockets of pollinator habitat can be isolated. And that's not necessarily good for insects reproduction and encouraging those populations to get back up to what they used to be. So for the idea of Kentucky to provide its right-of-way has this large connectivity and acres and acres and acres of potential pollinator habitat that we could help these pollinators bounce back. Some of the things that actually benefit KYTC in particular is that it's aesthetically pleasing. A lot of people, especially the general public, are becoming very aware of how important pollinators are. And there's a lot of the public who actually wants to see their local government get more involved with helping out pollinators. And as you can see from these photos and from other photos that we'll show you in our presentation, it can be this really beautiful, kind of a beautification project. Another thing that we've taken into consideration is that the less of mowing we do, the less expensive it is to mow. some of these pollinator plots will only need to be mowed once a year as opposed to 5 or 6 times a year that we were doing. So there is a financial benefit to KYTC being involved. Now, from my end of things, I actually work with concurrence and compliance with Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, which basically means that on any project that has federal funding, we have to be in line with the Endangered Species Act. And some of the species that are on the Endangered Species Act list are, in fact, insects. The rusty patch bumblebee was listed about 2 years ago now. And the monarch butterfly, which is this, I mean, most of you have probably seen a monarch butterfly or understand that, you know, they're a very popular, very well-known pollinator species. We've been following their population decline, and we now understand that it's not a matter of if the monarch butterfly is listed as an endangered species, it's a matter of when. So this is something that we need to get ahead of as far as compliance with Section 7 and our mitigation anyway. So we're trying to integrate all these other concepts into our pollinator initiative. So the pollinator conservation strategy is something that I was involved with. Ellen Mullins, who some of you may know that name, this is something that she really takes a good amount of credit for. It's basically this agreement between KYTC, FHWA, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the Kentucky Field Office. And it's been initiative as a proactive measure to promote pollinators and their habitat within KYTC roadsides to get ahead of the federal listing of pollinator species under the ESA. And that basically means that if we can create a large amount of pollinator habitat as a way of getting ahead, we can then remove potential pollinator habitats on future construction sites and fall back on these new sites that we have created as a way of complying and creating habitat for the Environmental Protection Act. So that's another reason that I, in particular, in my area of expertise, are involved with the pollinator initiative. So when going into the pollinator initiative and talking about creating all this habitat, we knew that there were going to be some concerns that the public and other people at KYTC might have. You know, most people came up with, well, does it make a lot of sense to create this habitat adjacent to roads? Won't the impacts and collisions with cars, with all of these pollinators, like, actually be detrimental to the populations? Will it actually help those populations grow? And some of the studies that we've looked into actually show that there's little to no significant difference in collisions when it comes to pollinator habitat or if it's a grassland monoculture. There's no significant incline or decline. It's about the same. Another thing that, particularly here in Kentucky, people were worried about was collisions with wildlife, specifically deer, because that is one of the main collision type incidents that you can run into in Kentucky. And we actually found that a lot of studies are showing that deer actually prefer the monoculture grassland, because that grass that has been cut maybe 1 to 2 days prior is very succulent. It has a lot of nutrients. It has a lot of water. So they are far more inclined to hang out in an area where you have just mowed the grass less than a week ago than you are where you haven't mowed the grass in 6 months, because deer are browsers. They're looking for that more succulent type grass situation than they are like high stem, anything like that, any type of woody kind of thing. And then, of course, we are aware of the fact that there are some places in Kentucky where it's just not going to be appropriate to put pollinator habitat with these higher standing plants because of line of sight. There are going to be some areas where it's tight corners or it's too close to the road, there's not enough right of way, and we are taking that into consideration for each site, the safety of the safety of the public and anyone driving on the road. So putting the strategy into action, how are we going to do this? What exactly are we going to do? Identifying existing quality habitat, doing all that. We understood that we needed to get involved with a group of people that maybe knew more about the pollinator habitat that was already out there and could help us identify it. So for this portion of the slideshow, I'm going to hand it over to Mike, and Mike will tell you all about the things that we've been doing in the past year.
Thanks, Casey. I appreciate everything that you've done for pollinators and everything that the Division of Environmental Analysis has done. Until we got you all involved, we're really on a different level now that environmental analysis had gotten involved with the pollinator conservation. We had known back in 2014 when the presidential executive order on pollinator protection was issued that we had some areas of good quality pollinator habitat on our highway rights-of-ways. Our roadsides were not just biological deserts of tall fescue monocultures, but they were abundant, although not highly diverse, floral resources there, from clovers, crown vetch, partridge pea, even some weedy species. But there were some things there that were beneficial to pollinators that were in our existing seed mix. The white Dutch clover is an excellent pollinator resource particularly for honeybees, but also for many native bees as well. Recent University of Kentucky research has shown that the nectar from these non-native flowers is actually just as nutritious for the pollinator insects as the native flowers are, and it is often available when the native flowers are actually dormant. So there is some benefits to some of these other plants. Of course, the native pollinators do require native plants for forage for the caterpillars. In the case of the butterfly, they do, such as the monarch butterfly, they do require the native milkweed, also for shelter and for egg laying, building the nest in, and so forth. So when we started out, we knew that we had a lot of work to do to restore these native plants. We initially started out, we really didn't have any dedicated funding for establishing these pollinator habitat zones. We were using some beautification funds initially to establish some of these zones across the state. We relied on our partners at Roundstone Seed, a nationally recognized seed supplier based here in Kentucky, for species recommendations for our seed mix to develop attractive, diverse, native pollinator habitat with emphasis on milkweeds for monarch butterflies and full season blooms for other pollinator species. And managing these pollinator habitat zones is a completely different game than managing tall fescue turf. Most of our roadside environment staff has backgrounds in production agriculture, turf management, or horticulture, production horticulture. So natural lands management is an area that we've had to get up to speed on through attending workshops and field days from UK, from Roundstone Seed, and from other local, state, and federal agencies. Now, when we convert existing roadside vegetation to Pollinator Habitat, it requires us to eliminate all plant competition. Now, the Native Americans and Mother Nature used fire and other disturbances of the soil to do that. But we, of course, we can't, we're not in a position to use fire on roadsides at this point. So we have to use multiple applications of non-selective herbicides. An ideal site on the roadside would not have any perennial weeds such as Johnson grass, Canada thistle, hemp dogbane, buckhorn plantain, etc. But these are very common weeds on our roadsides, and often they require additional herbicide treatments. At least one full growing season may be required to prepare a site for seeding. This is, you know, it's a slow process. People get impatient and expect instant results, but that's not what you get with these native plants. It takes years to establish them. Once we are satisfied most of the weed seed has emerged and the weeds have been controlled, we no-till seed a pollinator seed mixture that's best suited for the site conditions, i.e. a wet mix or wet conditions, maybe something that may be suited better to dry conditions where you have thin soil, etc. Typically, the first year of blooms will consist of the annuals in the mix, such as sunflowers and some of the smaller perennials. It's usually not until the second or third year that these these flowers really come into their own, and you have something really showy. And of course, there is maintenance required on these sites. Selective herbicides may be needed to control these problematic annual weeds such as giant foxtail and mare's tail until the native species are more dominant in the plots. These herbicide applications may require dedicated spray equipment because a lot of these native plants are extremely sensitive to a lot of the herbicides that we typically use for weed control. So they may actually require dedicated spray equipment that has not had any contaminants in it whatsoever. Mowing can also be used during the establishment year to reduce the competition from these annual weeds. Soon after beginning these pollinator habitat zones, we asked our Office of Information Technology to develop a simple application for monitoring and tracking these sites because we wanted to be able to keep track of them. When you're dealing with sites all over the state, it's easy to lose track of them. And so they were very helpful. They built an app for us using the collector platform that would allow us to inspect. We could make management recommendations. We could also inventory the sites and add to them as we added sites. They have done several upgrades of this app, and it has greatly increased its ability for our biologists to look at the habitat quality of different sites also. Next slide, please. Until the Division of Environmental Analysis was able to identify some funding for a statewide survey of our roadsides for pollinators, there had never been any inventory of roadside pollinator habitat or any statewide right-of-way plant surveys that I'm aware of. We knew there were lots of common milkweeds on roadsides, but had never really looked to see if there were other sites with more diverse remnants of native pollinators. The Division of Environmental Analysis recommended that we partner with the Kentucky Nature Preserves for this work because they had the staff with the expertise, and these survey results would also mutually benefit them as well. It would help to add to their database of the native plants. In 2020, they have already completed a survey which included parts of District 3, District 4, and District 5. Next slide, please. And we've been very impressed with the pace of their work. The preliminary results from the survey, which they're still still doing analysis on these surveys, but the preliminary results was that they surveyed approximately 7,000 miles of road. They used a Survey 123 as a basis for a rapid assessment tool app developed by the Monarch Joint Venture. 149 inspection forms were completed. 62 of these were evaluated for remnant grasslands. 62 paired points of poor quality grassland were identified. 25 poor quality sites evaluated during the initial testing. 24 sites were identified as good or better grassland remnants. As we knew, there was not a lot of them, but there are a few out there, and they identified them and documented those sites. Some of the results of this, there will be an additional analysis and continued evaluation of the scoring system to refine that. There also will be a baseline of high quality remnant communities and pollinator habitats for future use. This will help to inform our management decisions to protect important habitats. It will also be helpful with detecting early invasions of invasive plants. And there will also be some training for our district roadside staff on how to identify and manage these remnant grasslands and pollinators in the future. Next slide, please. Now, obviously, if we can just preserve as is or enhance existing habitat by interseeding milkweed and other species lacking in otherwise good sites, there is a considerable cost savings. Some of our best sites have come from somewhat poor soil conditions and less than good drainage. Conversely, some of our most challenging sites from a weed competition standpoint have come from former row crop fields and pasture lands. I would speculate this is due to an accumulation of weed seed in these rich agricultural soils that require repeated herbicide applications over more than one growing season before we can seed them. Also, we are providing more than just plantings for pollinators. We are installing some solitary bee nesting houses and are also encouraging the districts to construct what are known as bee banks for ground nesting bee species as well. Next slide, please. The Kentucky Natural Land Trust has been a great partner for us to use for processing payments for seeds, flowering trees, transplants, seeding services, and pollinator habitat maintenance services with federal monies. They do a really great job, and this has greatly simplified the procurement and payment process for us. Here's a listing of some of the sites and some of the projects. Here's kind of a 2020 update on some statistics. Even though COVID-19 has shut a lot of things down, there is a lot going on with pollinators in 2020. We have 50 plus new habitat sites under development. We currently have 200 plus acres established or under development in all 12 districts, and we're thrilled about that. We've been able to get all 12 districts on board. We have 50 plus flower plots or monarch way stations at the rest areas, and these have been installed using both contractor and state force seeding. Next slide, please. Another great program that is benefiting pollinators is our Department of Corrections horticultural program. We several years back partnered with the Kentucky Department of Corrections to utilize their horticultural education program and greenhouses to grow transplants using both collected and purchased seeds. They have the facilities to create the proper conditions required for germinating native seeds, and were able to produce thousands of high quality transplants for us. And these transplants are a significant shortcut in establishing many of these hard to propagate species like milkweed when you're trying to get a rapid result, such as what you like to have for a monarch way station. Some of these things, species, are slow to germinate, and they may not even germinate the first year. So it's been great that we've been able to get the corrections to grow a lot of these transplants for us. We have established the monarch way stations at our rest areas and welcome centers using these transplants, and they have been a big hit with the traveling public, where they can observe pollinators in a more formal landscape setting. And we're planning to collect an even greater variety of seeds this year for the inmates to use for propagation. We are proud of the progress made for pollinator conservation and our roadside maintenance. We would like to now encourage those of you in the project design and construction arena to please consider pollinators in all your road projects where opportunities exist. We feel it is important for the environment, and it's a worthy effort. Next slide, please. And just to end our presentation, we have a presentation of it's a bee's eye view that was captured by some drone video of various pollinator plantings that was shot by Adam Smith of our Office of Public Affairs. And Casey, you want to go ahead and run that, please?
Yep, I am going to, I'll wait till you turn your mic. There we go. I'm going to try to screen share with y'all. Of course, I can't click on this link. So if y'all could just be patient with me for one moment, I'm going to get this pulled up. and we will hopefully get this thing running and going. Give me just another second, folks. I apologize for the delay. Hmm. Well, folks, of course, I'm having some trouble getting that going here, so I apologize for that, Mike. I will see if I can get that running up by the end of my next presentation to show you all, so I apologize for that. But Mike, thank you so much for that second half of the presentation. That was excellent information, and I just really appreciate everything you guys have done and let us get involved with this. We're super excited to be a part of it as well.
Thanks, Casey.
You're very welcome. All right, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the Q&A. Let's see, I see 3:30 on my computer, so I will give till 3:31. If anyone wants to type in their questions now, that's perfectly fine. If not, they can wait until the end of the second webinar that I have planned for you all. I'm going to go ahead and get that second webinar up right now. We have a question from Brad Eldridge. You still with us, Mike? He might have hopped off.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, this might be a good question for you to answer. Brad Eldridge asks, are there programs, resources, contacts, etc., for setting up pollinator habitats in local government lands like county parks?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the NRCS maybe has well, I guess U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There may be some funds available for that. I can send you the name of a gentleman who might be able to help on that, though.
All righty. All righty. Thank you, Mike. All right, I'm going to give just another minute here for questions, and I'm going to get the other webinar pulled up in just a moment. Mike, I don't know if you've noticed this, but Brad has put his email in the chat for those contacts that you might recommend to him.
Okay, I got it.
Alrighty. Just another few seconds here, just in case. Thank you, Carl. Carl says we did a great job. I believe him. Carl doesn't lie. Alrighty, folks. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If one of y'all, and I'll hand this over to Carl since I know Carl's in the audience. Carl, can you see my Birds on Bridges presentation there? Hopefully he will respond. Carl says an emphatic yes. So I'm going to go with all of you can see my new presentation here. It should be showing up. All right. All right. So we're going to move off from pollinators and we're going to Lee Carlton. Thank you very much, Lee. I'm going to move off of pollinators and I'm going to go to another topic that we deal with in the biology department, which is migratory birds, or birds on bridges most specifically. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I was actually a bird biologist in my former employment, where working in Colorado, basically my full-time job was dealing with birds and bird nesting on construction sites. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about KYTC and our dealings with migratory birds on bridges, nesting on bridges, and what our mitigation for those species are, and what we've done in the past, and where we hope to move in the future. So, for those of you who don't know, bridges, even though they are artificial, they are not found in nature, most of them, they create ideal habitat for migratory birds. The reason for this is that, you know, most birds, especially smaller species, they love crevices. The bigger species, they will nest up in high places. There are some species that are very specific to nesting over water. So on top of all of these features that they replicate in an artificial manner in relation to nature, there is also an aspect of nesting on bridges that is indicative of loss of habitat. So some of these species have experienced habitat loss in the past, and where these bridges unintentionally make up for that habitat in an artificial manner. Bird nests can be found anywhere from the top of the trusses to the bottom of the supports and everywhere in between. So there's nowhere on a bridge that is typically safe. Even if it's a flat surface, there are birds that are specialized in their nest making capabilities, such as swallows, to fill in those gaps. The nesting season for birds depends. It can last anywhere from January to October. There are birds actively nesting or beginning to nest or ending their nesting season between those months. So unless you plan on removing a bridge in November to December, there is a chance that you may have to deal with your birds on your bridges. And if you're thinking that there is a design aspect to this, that we can try to get around it, there is no bridge design that I have ever come across that will prevent all species of birds from nesting on your bridge. Especially considering habitat loss. Sometimes birds will nest in unconventional places. If they think that there's even a slight chance of success, they may put their nest there. And I've seen birds nest in some crazy places before. So why are we at KYTC concerned about this? Well, the main reason, the main legal reason, is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. And it is a federal law that prohibits taking or harassment, trade, purchase, deliver, whatever have you, of any bird or any part of that bird or an egg from that bird. An active nest is included in that. A non-active nest is not included in that. So if you come across an empty nest on your bridge, you can legally remove that part of the bird and its nesting process. But we're going to talk a little bit today about what we do when it comes to finding nests on bridges. Some of you may have heard that the Migratory Bird Treaty Act has been in the news lately because there is some drive within the current administration to change some vital aspects of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. I will not get into the politics of it, but basically it would allow certain, if not all, construction activities or activities associated with running a company or any kind of thing like that. Basically, it boils down to, unless your intention is to kill the bird, then you have no impact on the population of that bird, which you might see that as being kind of problematic. Politics aside with that, and personal opinion aside, this change has already been challenged heavily, not just by environmental groups that are openly suing the U.S. government for trying to make this change, but recently, U.S. District Court struck down this change, saying that it was contrary to the law, to the intent of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So the reason that I bring this up is that even if this change happens and it becomes legal to remove these nests, remove these birds, to kill these eggs or these chicks, we at KYTC are not planning on moving forward in that direction. The main reason for that being is that overall, our government and our mitigation is moving forward in a more ecologically friendly manner. And we don't see any signs of that really changing. We may take a few steps back, but the trajectory so far is moving towards ecological awareness and friendliness as opposed to moving backward. So we are going to continue on the path that we intended to continue on, in spite of the legislation that is being highly contested right now. Another aspect of why we at KYTC are continuing forward in a more ecologically aware standpoint is that many of these historic nests of these breeding pairs are known to the general public. And I know that seems a little strange, but there are ornithologists and bird enthusiasts out there who have been watching this same breeding pair maybe for 10, 15 years. And if suddenly they show up and you're knocking eggs into the water, that might cause us to get sued for another reason. So that's another reason we're going to continue in this trajectory. The third and final reason I want to bring up today on why we're continuing the way we are is that we have a partnership with Kentucky State Fish and Wildlife. And in fact, they have become our main source of mitigation guidance. And we want to honor that partnership with them. We want to continue that partnership with them, and we will rely upon them because eventually the way things are piling out is that we will need to do mitigation for migratory birds at some point in the future. And having this partnership with Kentucky State Fish and Wildlife and honoring it is far more behooving to us than it would be to kind of push it aside. So that's the reason that KYTC is moving forward with mitigation. So when does the Migratory Bird Treaty Act not apply? Because there are instances where it does not apply. Times when the MBTA does not apply to a bird that is nesting on your bridge, and it's when that bird is non-native, exotic, invasive to North America. Four of the main species that we deal with here in Kentucky are, going from left to right, the house sparrow, the rock pigeon or the pigeon, the European starling, and up there at the top is the Eurasian collared dove. These are species that were brought into North America intentionally, and they have not only found a niche, but have gone wild in their population growth. House sparrows are those little birds you see at McDonald's that everybody loves to feed, and they're all over the place. I think anybody who has been near a bridge is aware of pigeons. They're disgusting. And the European starlings, if you've ever seen those huge flocks of birds that fly over cities, that's more than likely the European starling. And the Eurasian collared dove is an interesting exotic invasive because it actually came here of its own accord. By its migrational patterns, but its migrational patterns are actually changing because of climate change. So it is a species that does not belong here, and we do not have to mitigate for it. We can, remove active nests, but it is one of those species that kind of is entering a new world of mitigation where we have to consider climate change when it comes to these new and invasive species coming in. So there are times when the MBTA does not apply. So let's talk about when it does apply. Species that typically utilize bridges. These can typically, a bald eagle will not nest on a bridge, but it may nest close to your bridge because a bald eagle is actually a fisher bird. Most of its diet consists of carrion and also fish. So while you may not have an eagle nest on your bridge specifically because they are extremely large, extremely heavy structures, you may have one within a half a mile of your construction site. And if you have a bald eagle nest, because the bald eagles are under their own protection act, the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act, they have their own set of mitigation guidelines that are very strict. So even if it's not physically on your bridge, you need to be aware of any bald eagles that may be nesting nearby. The biggest offender that I come across and that most of us come across are osprey. Osprey are the ones that are going to be nesting on the very top of your bridge in a very visual way, and they really love our bridges. So those are the ones that you're going to see a lot of the time. Multiple swallow species. Cliff swallows are the biggest offenders. They love to make their little mud nest, just thousands of them along the side of your bridge. And then you'll have the barn swallow, which will be underneath. But multiple swallow species. Barn owls love to be on the underside of bridges, inside the deck, inside those crevices. And owls are the tricky ones because they don't actually build a nest. They actually just need a flat level surface. They throw some feathers in there, and that's it. One day you'll come in and maybe you'll miss an egg. You'll just see some debris and not think anything of it. And then 2 weeks go by and you come back and there's 6 owl chicks staring at you. So some of these nests are not as obvious as others, which is why it's so important when we do our bridge inspections to really know what we're looking for. Great horned owls will also nest in bridges. They typically like to take over a nest from other species. They don't build their own nest. They actually come in like very early in the year. Those are the ones setting up in January and February. And they'll take over old osprey nests. They'll take over old ravens nests. They're a little more obvious, but I've seen them nest on football stadiums. So they're very typically acclimated to people. But the most important thing that you can probably take away from any of this is that any bird protected by the MBTA that likes your bridge and decides to nest on it is under the protections of the MBTA. Even if it's robins, anything. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. But at KYTC, since we're still kind of new to the whole mitigation thing and what we need to cover as far as the MBTA is concerned, we're mostly focused on those bigger, more obvious species or those colony nesters like the swallows. So, mitigation guidelines. Basically, when it comes to mitigation guidelines for KYTC, they are broad overviews that must be specialized depending upon upon specifics, whether it's the species of the bird, And within the species of the bird, you have different tolerances for disturbance between breeding pairs. There are some bald eagles that will not tolerate any kind of different levels of disturbance within a half a mile of their nest. There are some bald eagles that are so accustomed to people that you can mow the grass right under their nesting tree and they don't care. So that is something we take into consideration. The schedule of your project. If you know that you have an active bird nest on your bridge and you are able to schedule the demolition of that bridge or to schedule the demolition of that section of that bridge in the inactive season, that's something that we always try to aim for because it makes it so much easier. The location of the nest is something to consider as well. If you have one nest on a section of bridge that you can put off, great. If you have 5 nests of osprey all throughout your bridge, that's a whole other situation. And then if the main thing that we try to keep in mind whenever it comes to mitigation of any kind is what is its likelihood of success? Because we don't want to do something that's going to take a whole lot of time, a whole lot of money, and not work anyway. And one of the things that we often turn to when it comes to mitigation is exclusion and deterrence. Exclusion is when you make it impossible for your bridge to be infiltrated by bird nests. One of the ways we do this for swallows in particular is to net the bridge. If we put up a temporary netting situation where the swallows just simply can't get in there and get their nests established, that will exclude them from your bridge and you don't have to worry about them. And then you have deterrence, which the bird can get to it, the bird can be next to it, they can even land on it, but the very presence of that object deters them from nesting in that area. So whenever you use exclusion or deterrence, you also have to keep in mind there is always inherent risk. There are some situations where you can put up a deterrent and that bird does not care. It will nest in the deterrent, on the deterrent, under the deterrent. It's incredibly frustrating, but it's something we have to keep in mind. You also have to keep in mind that some of these deterrents, specifically netting and exclusionary tactics, they need to be properly established and put up. I have seen multiple times when exclusionary netting was put up, it was not put up properly, and dozens of dead birds ended up tangled up in the netting. It was not a good PR day. So always keep that in mind that deterrents and exclusionaries, each one comes with its own risk of either not working or being really bad. So keep that in mind. Now, with this, I wanted to focus on a case study where we dealing with osprey specifically. And this is based off of a paper that is State Fish and Wildlife, and I got to give her enormous kudos for writing this. Lee Carlton is a co-author on this, and so am I. But Kate, this is her brainchild, so she's the one who kind of consolidated all the information we gathered from a situation we ran into and made determinations of future mitigation based off of it. You all can read the abstract, obviously, but basically, this is referring to the US 60 and US 80 bridges over the Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley. Some of you may be familiar with this, some of you not. It's over in D1 in the Paducah area. And it basically talks about what was attempted, what worked, and what didn't. And spoilers, not much worked. Just letting you in on that right now. So, when we knew that we were going to have to redo these bridges because they were built in the 1930s and it was time to tear them down and build them back up again, they were aware that they had multiple osprey nesting on each site. So they set up mitigation tactics well ahead of the actual demolition. One of the mitigation tactics that they did was They set up 8 nesting platforms within 2,500 meters of the bridges, for each bridge, I believe. And they set up exclusionaries, they set up deterrence, they did everything ahead of time that you're supposed to do when it comes to osprey. What they didn't realize was that osprey are not like typical birds in that they have nest fidelity out the window. So it was already understood when we went into this project that these nesting pairs had been there since estimated of 1999. So this is a situation where the birds had been there for a long time. They had, quote unquote, claimed the bridge as their nesting area. And this was not a new set of birds that had never been here before. This was birds that have been here and had successful nests a long time. So when construction actually started, or was trying to get started, and the osprey came back after all these deterrents were put into place, the deterrence didn't really work. So they tried removing nesting material. The osprey would come back the next day and put it back. They tried putting deterrents on top of exactly where the nests were. And as you can tell from the photograph, the osprey would come in and they would just put nesting material on top of the deterrent. It gets to the point where the osprey are so desperate to lay their egg that they don't have a choice. They just lay it on bare steel. For the sake of time, I'm going to move a little quickly. As you can tell, there were 2 eggs laid on this bare steel beam to the left. There were osprey hanging out next to people who were working on the bridge, actively being harassed by them, not really being deterred from making nests, though. And as you can tell from this photograph, this osprey wasn't deterred in the least. That is an osprey that is actively nesting underneath of a deterrent. So what did we learn? When it came to osprey, we had this idea